This is a first look at the genome modifier's iterations control and the ability to grow a face selection. We have a plane with 20 by 20 segments, and we'll set through a mesh select modifier some faces to be selected. We would like to grow this selection over time. Inside our genome modifier, we have a for loop, and we are using the current mesh, the number of neighbors, which defines the number of iterations of the loop, the future selected state of the face index, and the current selected state boolean that will define whether it's selected or not. Inside the for loop, we use a new face neighbor operator. We'll be looping from 1 to 3, actually from 0 to 2 in this case, and we'll be checking the neighbor of the current face with index 0, 1 or 2 based on the for loop's iteration index. Then we'll check the selection state of this neighbor. We'll see if it's 0 or not, and if either the current selection is true or the neighbor is true, then the current face will be set to selected. Now, if we would move the time slider, you'll see that our selection is growing, and this is because we have a new iteration spinner which defines how many times per frame the genome modifier will be run. And we have keyframed it from 0 to 100, and that means that our modifier will be run 0 times on the first frame, on frame 0, and 100 times on the last frame. So now the selection is growing. And you have to keep in mind that this operation is history independent. That means jumping 20 frame calculates the modifier n times and creates the corresponding selection. Let's go back to 20 by 20 segmentation. And you probably noticed that we have some modifiers on the stack. If we enable the push modifier on top of the selection, then we're going to push all the quads that are selected in the tri-mesh. And we can also switch the logic of our growing selection to an exclusive OR, XOR. In this case, the logical test inside between the currently selected state of the current face and the neighbor will be switched from OR to XOR, and this creates a pattern similar to the game of life, where neighbor faces are checking each other and setting the selection to on and off accordingly. We can change the selection, the initial selection, and if we move up the stack, we're going to see that depending on what face was selected initially, the patterns will grow differently. We can go inside the selection modifier and, for example, select the 4 corners and get 4 waves approaching from the 4 corners and creating new patterns. And again, we can enable the push modifier. You'll notice that only where 2 triangles building a quad in the editable mesh selected, the push will actually push them out, otherwise it skips them. And we have a second genome modifier which is set to read the average face selection of the neighbors of a vertex and set the vertex selection based on how many of the neighbors are actually selected. And this gives us a soft selection at vertex level. So if we would enable the push modifier on top of this selection, we'll have a much better wave-like pattern. And we can enable turbo smooth on top and then disable the flow of the selection and relax the complete plane in order to produce even better smoothing. We can change at any time the actual selected faces in order to produce new patterns, or we could go inside the mesh select and leave only the central face selected in order to get a kind of a concentric wave distribution from the center to the sides. Let's select again the corner face and look at the propagation in this case from the one corner to the center. As you can see, thanks to the newly added iteration spinner, which can be keyframed to control how many times the genome modifier will be run on a single frame, and also to the for loop, we can now create new effects that weren't possible before.